Hi, and welcome to MindSet, an HCD vidcast, where we dive into the world of applied consumer neuroscience and market research with leading experts in the field. My name is Michelle Nagella, PhD in behavioral neuroscience and Director of Research and Innovation at HCD.
And I'm Kathryn Ambrose, the Manager of Behavioral and Marketing Sciences with HCD. As your hosts, we are going to act as the buzzkills for the buzzwords, taking time to critically think about the limitations and pitfalls of emerging trends and topics within the field to help you identify what innovation has a lot of untapped potential or is too good to be true.
Now, HCD is a full-service research house which provides research capabilities on consumers by looking at how they perceive, evaluate, and respond to different types of stimuli, such as looking at product experiences, communications, or just general consumer and shopper experiences. We use a combination of tools that come from psychology, physiology, neuroscience, as well as the traditional methods that people typically use to see how they experience different stimuli. That stimuli can range from the early stages of exploration all the way through the final product validation tests. This is what we refer to as applied consumer neuroscience.
So stick around for more curious conversations as we chat our way through the ever-evolving space of consumer science. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to MindSet. We're so happy to have you here. My name is Kathryn Ambrose, and I am joined by the lovely Michelle Nagella. We are so happy to be here again. And today we decided to have just a conversation of the two of us, so that way we could chat a little bit about things that are on our minds and topics that we've realized are trends in the industry that we think are important to discuss. So today in particular, we wanted to talk a little bit about a topic we've touched on in the past, which is implicit and sensory, but really put those two things together and find out why they all of a sudden have this spotlight on them in the industry world, but also what does it mean? And what are the implications of doing implicit sensory research? So, Michelle, can you just give me a quick one-liner for any new listeners that we have about what is implicit that we're talking about here? And also what is sensory?
So implicit has become this isn't going to be quick. I can't do anything like this quick. So implicit is, I guess, the easy answer is to say that implicit is supposed to be that non-conscious response, right? So a lot of times implicit can mean anything from the psychological test of implicit association all the way through doing EEG, right? Because all of that is measuring the non-conscious response. But in this sense, we are really focusing on that psychological test, right? So the one that came from social psychology that uses reaction time or some sort of judgment that reveals someone's bias. And so when it was originally created in social psychology, it was about looking at all the isms, right? So the racism and the sexism and all of those ageism that people don't necessarily want to tell you that they are judging things on, but they really are. And the way that they are able to reveal that, psychologists were able to reveal that was by having them run through a test which revealed hesitations that they would have on combining certain ideas together. So, putting female with scientist might take someone who has some sexist biases, some gender biases. It might take them longer to put those two ideas together, right? So the idea is that your latency in response would reveal your bias. So this has been used in market research, which is something we've talked about in the past, and we're definitely going to have a link for that you can check out on one of our earlier vidcasts. But this has been used quite a lot, and it's become much more popular, I would say, in the past couple of years, probably because it can be done online, right? So you don't have to have people come in person. With the pandemic, a lot of research has moved online. So it is an exercise you can just do on your computer or on your phone or whatever it might be, but it's also cheap and easy, right? Which makes it particularly interesting to people.
Absolutely. And I think that you really hit the nail on the head here by saying it's quick and easy, because if you have a survey, you can quite simply just add it to the end of a survey, put a link to that implicit exercise that you want to do, and then put it out. And so you can do it in large numbers, just like you would with any other survey. So it is something quick. It's a quick
Yeah.
tool to implement. But I do want to push a little bit further and say, so we've seen it being used pretty much in market research for a bit of time now, but there's been this new upheaval of interest where people want to start putting it into the worlds of sensory science and
Right.
really,
Well, I guess
yeah,
that's kind of the funny part for us because while like before, like 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago now, our first step into using implicit was very client initiated,
driven. Mhm.
and it was specifically for sensory. Um, and no one had actually, we had never read anything of people really doing it in the past, except for maybe some work that's been done by Charles Spence, at Oxford University. And um, he's done a lot of work looking at sensory, multi-sensory experiences and how one sense can sort of influence the other, right? So
Mhm.
hearing, or hearing more crunch, can influence your perception of taste, or the shape of a piece of chocolate can influence your perception of what it's going to taste like, something like that. The
Yeah, the
color
cross
of a
model.
bag. It's all these cross model associations. One
Yeah.
is in, biasing your perception of what you're going to experience. And so he's done a lot of work on that in the past. That's very academic. But this client that we had kind of led us into wanting to do a traditional implicit association test, because there really wasn't anything more simplified, but it was for fragrance. And
Mhm.
I hadn't seen anything really done like that in the past. And we hadn't done it for much marketing research. And honestly, it wasn't being used in marketing research for brand research. But the first thing that we encountered were the problems, because
Of
we
course.
were kind of being asked to use a very traditional academic implicit approach, which involves at least 7 steps, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
7 trials that the person has to go through in pairing different combinations of things together. And that works really well if you have a sort of bimodal comparison you're doing, which works really well in academics, especially with the isms, where you have male versus female, or black versus white,
Right. It's a
or
binary
old versus
approach.
young, totally
Yeah.
binary. And that works really well in that case. But when it comes to fragrances or flavors, people usually has 6 or 7 different prototypes that they want to test. And so it doesn't work out quite as well.
I could see that getting complicated very quickly, because
Yeah.
especially just talking about fragrance and talking about scents, typically people have maps that they use, sensory maps, because it is such a complex
Yeah.
area that it's hard to really even visualize. So putting that into the context of
Yeah.
something like an implicit, it would really be a step further and requires a
Mhm.
lot more critical
And
thinking.
yeah, you're right. They usually have those maps because when they test these 6 or 7 different flavors or fragrances, they also have a lexicon of attributes they want to test. So,
Mm.
is it salty? Is it fruity? Is it happy? Is it any of these healthy? All
Mhm.
these ideas are usually put in a kata, and a kata is a check all that apply exercise where the participant sees lists of words and they just check the ones they think are a match to whatever the experience was, the brand or the fragrance or the flavor, whatever it might be, or just the product in general. This toothpaste is healthy.
Right.
It is minty. And they just check these things off in the check all that apply. So they might have like 20 words, right? Or 10 words attributes that they want to know if it's a match for the prototypes, and which one of these prototypes is a better match for those. And
Right.
so it makes sense to use an implicit, especially for some of these words that are a little more difficult for people to answer when they're thinking about it too much. So if you want to find out if someone feels that the toothpaste is healthy, you don't want them to overthink it. You want to know their gut level reaction, their implicit reaction. So all of that really makes sense, except in how an implicit study is designed. It just doesn't work that way.
Right, right. And I can definitely see that, especially from what you're saying in terms of people articulating, it fits so perfectly because even my favorite thing to do is listen to people try to describe candle smells because no
Yeah.
one can really piece it together
They
since
know what it is, but they can't always verbalize it, right?
exactly. And a lot of times that's why people use analogies. Oh, it smells like pumpkin pie. It smells a little bit
Mhm.
fruit, like, people use
But
these
what is it
different.
about pumpkin pie? And usually that's the idea that it's warm, right?
Mhm.
So like warm, it's almost like, oh, of course a candle is warm. It's got fire. But like the fragrance itself being a warm fragrance is really difficult for the consumer to like grasp onto as a description. But if you were to have them go through implicit exercise and timed reaction, gut level reaction, is it warm or is it cold? Like they can make
Yeah.
that decision. And what really helps in this idea of getting this reaction time, this strength of association for this particular sensory experience is that when you have those 7 prototypes, and let's say the word is warm, being able to see that prototypes 1, 2, and 3 are warmer than 4, 5, and 6, right? Or showing that statistically 4 is the warmest, but it also is happy and healthy and whatever the words might be. So it is a great exercise, but it's something that, again, we saw a lot of challenges, right? So, if you wanted to check out how it has been done a bit more using specifically implicit reaction tests, right?
Mhm.
That has been used a lot in branding. Again, they aren't typically doing, 6 or 7 brands, or they aren't doing 10 or 15 attributes
Mhm.
like you would typically do in any consumer product test or sensory test. And so those methodologies haven't translated really well. And so we've had 7 or 8 years to fine tune and develop it, but we've seen the problems. And so the reason I wanted to have this conversation that I thought was really important to bring up is because I think that a lot of people aren't aware of these problems, that when you're translating this methodology to work in a consumer research setting and specifically around sensory, that it's a lot more nuanced. And so I have seen firsthand where, a client has brought in another research provider that comes from market research and they don't have any sensory experience and they aren't thinking about the nuances that come with designing sensory research, like
Right.
understanding how you, if it's for a room fragrance, how should you handle someone walking into a room to smell a fragrance? It sounds like not a big deal, but when you think about it, it actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is too, when you mentioned that it's somebody that comes from market research, they may not even know what they don't know. So
Mhm.
it's as they're going through trying to decide what to do, they may not be aware of the contextual elements of putting on a sensory project that need to be
Yeah.
considered.
Like
And
olfactory fatigue,
yeah.
making sure that you clear the room of any other fragrances, like it needs to really be sealed. If it is a room fragrance and you're fragrancing a room, it needs to be, they need a moment in between rooms to cleanse the palate, so to say.
Mhm.
You really have to think about all the nuances of sensory research and respect the people that are your client because they are experts in that field. And I think that that's something that a lot of market researchers, having worked more on the advertising side, haven't had the chance to appreciate that this food scientist has a PhD in food science, has been working in food science for, 30, 40 years. They know what they're talking about in designing the consumer research. They've been doing it. There's a whole field of study around it that some newbie from market research and neuromarketing, they don't know what they're talking about. And it's a really complicated field. If you just think about how olfactory receptors work, you think about like, do they even know what a sensate is, right? So
Right, right.
sensates are that warming, that cooling additives that are added to a taste or a fragrance. It's very incredibly nuanced. And so designing research that's already complicated, implicit is complicated. When we said that it's simple and easy, it's fast and easy, it
Right.
looks fast and easy to the client. The back end is not fast and easy, right? So, I mean, on other things that people don't think about just for implicit are How is the data being normalized, right?
Mhm.
How are they dealing with non-responders? How are they dealing with people thinking too much? Because a lot of people, the key element to any implicit test is actually the pressure that's put on.
Of
So
course.
in the traditional implicit association test, when someone had to decide whether or not young or old was the match for the word, like professional, right?
Mhm.
Um, they had the pressure of having to match things that didn't work together. Right.
Yeah.
So having that challenge is actually what revealed the bias. So when we're looking at the more go, no go implicit test, or the IRT, the implicit reaction test, then what's the challenge there? What's going to reveal the bias? And you have to put like a pressure on, like a time constraint or, something like that to keep that pressure, to force them to answer something that they don't want to answer. And that's what a lot of these, what I would call fast explicit, really are not.
Yeah. And in addition to what you're saying, you also have to consider the target demographic that you're thinking about, because there will be certain people, groups of people that might be faster responders and be more comfortable responding to something quicker than, say,
Mhm.
another population. So if you're doing a study and you're focusing on maybe an elderly population, you
Yeah.
have to reconsider those nuances as well, because they might have a different reaction time, a different average reaction time. So you might be pulling somebody from the data that is really responding as fast as they can. It's just,
Yeah.
because of their abilities.
Yeah. So are they doing some sort of baseline measurement to see if you have someone that is going to be slower? So then what are you comparing them to? Like it's just really understanding the test itself, which is going even further than understanding that it's a sensory test, but just in doing implicit correctly, or the fact that there's more than one type of implicit test. And this is often really surprising to people when I bring it up, when clients ask us, "Oh, can you do implicit?" Yeah, we can. What kind of situation is this? Well, and they're like, well, no, what, like, can I see your test? It's like, well,
Mhm.
we need to choose the right one because there's a lot of different approaches, anything from that traditional all the way through, the fast explicit. Because
Right.
some people want to ask like a full on question. They want to do a purchase intent question as an implicit. And they're saying, well, can't you just get reaction time on it? Well, no, because that's a cognitive question.
Right.
A cognitive question gets you a cognitive answer.
It's
So
inherently explicit.
yeah. So just slapping reaction time onto any survey question doesn't make it implicit. It just means that you are measuring how long it took them to think about it, I guess.
Right.
But which is, I guess, sort of the purpose of implicit reaction timing, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I want to stress here is that the key to the real getting at the implicit is that challenge part.
Mhm.
So there's some nuances that I think people have to consider as the use of implicit is growing, which is one, what are you using it in, right?
Mhm.
Is it market research on branding, which is totally fine. Is it a product experience? Is it a sensory experience? You need to design specifically around that. So definitely have somebody that understands the nuances of that type of research. And then beyond that, understanding how a proper implicit study should work,
Yeah.
on the design, on the normalization of the data, the cleaning of the data, because it does need to be cleaned,
Mhm.
and then the correct analytics,
Right.
to make sure that you're getting real actionable results. Um,
Are using the right
for
statistical
us,
test. Yeah. Things
statistical
like that.
tests, we have two types of output that we look at, which is, doing the stats on the actual reaction time. So you get implicit scores of how strong the association is, which one is stronger, for example, right? But we also get, because people are answering or not, we get sort of a critical mass of response. So the go response, which would kind of be that same thing you'd get from a CATA, right? So
Mhm.
the percentage of people that agree that this particular attribute is a match for that fragrance. But you also get that strength. So you get these two sides of it, which are really important for making decisions and, really understanding how the sensory field works with their prototypes as well, right? So really considering that, okay, I need this bit of information to help with R&D. So like,
Yeah.
is this fragrance a perfect match? None of them are going to be a perfect match, but if it were paired with the packaging, will that strengthen the association? So being able to look at the data and make those sort of interpretations takes a little bit of an understanding of the business as well, and the consumer experience and understanding consumer psychology.
Right. And there is a benefit to having a team working on this so that you can have that, like you said, there's an expert in sensory. You have an expert coming at it from maybe the marketing branding side and really
Mhm.
trying to marry those things together. So that way we've talked about brand harmony before. So that way
Mhm.
you can get that brand harmony. And the thing that I want to circle back to that I just find so interesting is that we went through a bunch of nuances for fragrances, but that's just one that's just one sensory part. There are
Yeah.
so many other parts of the overall experience that have to be accounted for and considered when deciding the type of stimuli that you're going to look at. And when
Yeah.
you pick a stimuli, that you make sure that you really are controlling the environment as best you
Right.
can for those
Right. Because
specific.
we utilize nose clips, right? So sometimes we want to make sure that we have the timed effect of when they actually are smelling the fragrance, and also that they're not smelling the other fragrances from the previous room. Sometimes we use fragranced wands
Mhm.
where we have the fragrance trapped in a device and it's only released when we wave it in front of their nose, and then we clear the airspace before they go to the next one. In some cases, we do have people sniff from jars, but then also just ensuring that it's an amber jar where they can't see the substance, because you have to control for all these other contextual factors. So there's lots of different ways to do this. And it's just often not appreciated, I think, with people who are outside of sensory or food science or, real consumer science, not just, market research and branding.
Right. It's
Yeah, so it's really
packaged very
important.
nicely. And that's why there's
Yeah.
this misconception is because of the
Yeah.
way that, it's
It
been
takes a lot of
shared.
work. So this simple and easy, quick and easy test actually takes a lot of work on the back end. So making sure your provider understands that is important. Now, I will say that there are some processes that we've automated, right, to make it really quick and easy for certain clients who do the same tests over and over again.
Mhm.
But that is also fraught with a lot of complications, right?
Oh yeah.
So, on the back end, there's a lot of work that goes into it. And it's not as simple as plug and play. So it is possible, there is some software out there that just includes a implicit, button that you can push and have it added to your study. But, we've definitely found that there's a lot of complications that may affect the data if you're not really designing around that correctly. Yeah. So we're always happy to talk about it. I could talk about it forever.
So Michelle, I do want to ask you, as our, you have a background in sensory science. This is really your niche area. Where are areas that you feel this implicit doesn't work, or you've seen it been misused in the past where it's just they use the wrong test and what happens? What is the result when you use the wrong test?
Yeah, I think in some cases where they're trying to really do something that's more cognitive has been a
Mhm.
problem. I think when people aren't, we always just assume that we're talking about attributes that are adjectives, right? But some people are trying to use words that are nouns that are more of a fact, So if I were to ask you, for example, and it's a Snickers, and I asked you peanut, is it associated with peanuts? Well, yes, it as a
It has
fact, it
peanuts in it.
contains peanuts in it. And so it's very, it's like,
Right.
well, you have to think about the words you want to test. And um,
And
you
that's a
want to
huge
make sure.
part.
Yeah, and some words are actually better tested in just your standard survey question.
Mhm.
Liking, for example, or even some of the things like if you wanted to talk about fruitiness, you're probably better off doing that as a scaled question. And that's really a
That
cognitive
is
question. Is there
interesting.
like kind of like the peanuts? Is there fruit in it or not? Is there peanuts in it? Is not? Is it strong or is it weak? I think that that's not really an implicit reaction. Implicit is really more of those things that you can't verbalize, something that's more descriptive. We divide it up into product attributes and emotional attributes. So is this fragrance boring? Right?
Right.
Is this fragrance comforting? is this taste healthy is more about a product attribute. Is this, is it artificial? Um, is it safe? Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which safe is an interesting one because it can be a product attribute. Is it safe? Or it can be an emotional attribute. Does it make me feel safe? Right? Which are two
Mhm.
very different things.
Right.
So, we often do the implicit twice, one for the product attributes and one for the emotional attributes. And the reason we separate it is because it is such a quick response. We do want it to be easy enough for them to answer. So all these words are going to be the product is, right? The
Mhm.
product is safe, the product is healthy, the product is whatever, right? And then the next prompt in a separate exercise would be the product makes me feel. And the reason we do that is because it's easier for the person to have those gut level reactions when the prompting sentence fits the same words over and over and over again.
That
So they
makes
don't have to think, wait, is this
yeah.
safe makes me feel or safe that the product's safe? We don't want any hesitation because they don't understand the word.
Yeah, and that brings up another good point too, is if you and again, not to say that market researchers, they know market research, like that is, they're great at that. But when you are trying to determine the right words to use, there is an art to it because some words are too long and it's actually makes it cognitive because people need time to read the word that has 5 syllables in it or
Yeah.
something like that.
Multiple
So,
words.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the same thing for when people try to do questions that are cognitive questions like, do you want to purchase this product? So the act of reading that sentence takes time, and not everybody has the same reading ability or speed. So recognizing that, I think
Mhm.
another nuance is using consumer language, and this kind of goes as a warning to, we're kind of like trying to give warnings to market researchers that are trying to do sensory work, but I think the other way goes around as well, where um, R&D people have certain lexicons that they use that aren't consumer language. So they might be describing something as being
As a
metallic,
sensate.
as a sensate, right? And nobody knows what a sensate is, your average person. So we're always telling people all the time, use the consumer driven language. So for example, if they wouldn't describe um, a laundry detergent, as they would never use the word healthy, but let's say,
Right.
I'm just making that up, but let's say your average laundry detergent user doesn't use the word healthy when they're talking about laundry detergent. They use safe because safe makes more sense, or they use
Mhm.
sterile, or they use, cleaning, but they don't use healthy because they're not ingesting it, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that's the case. And so you don't want to test that word because it's obviously going to fall to the bottom if it's not something the consumer would use. So we often say that you really should start by finding out what the consumer language is. And then also making sure that it's simple enough for people to understand from the first read. So that's another part of sort of like the nuances of design. We expose people to the words we're going to test before we test them on them, because we don't want them wasting time trying to figure out what a word is.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be trying to read it for the first time because that's going to affect your reaction.
Response. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And again, it's also clarifying to them what these words mean, because another word could be, something like when we're talking about sustainability and being eco-friendly, the word
Yeah.
green, it could be literally the color green. It could be
Yeah.
green, there's so many multi-meaning words that
Mhm.
you have to be very cautious when determining this important part of the
Absolutely.
test.
Yeah,
But
because like people say green energy, but I don't
yeah,
think when they're dealing with a sustainable hand soap that they say green hand soap, because they probably literally mean that it's the color green, right?
exactly.
They might say eco-friendly hand soap, right? Or sustainable hand soap or something like that, or organic or natural or something.
Right. And I mean, we could talk about this for days and days and days, but I do actually want to move forward and play a game with you that we introduced recently. It's the game I believe is called React Attack, and it fits perfectly with
It
this
does. This
because
fits.
it's our theme of today's episode. So I curated a list of 10 words that I'm going to ask our sensory expert, Michelle. And
Okay.
uh, And basically, I just want, just for anybody who doesn't know, what we're going to do is I'm going to read the word to Michelle, and then she's just going to share the first thing that comes to her mind. This is basically a rapid fire implicit free association exercise.
And I have not seen these words, so.
Nope, no, not at all. She has no priming. But alrighty, so we're going to start. It's 10 words and she's on the clock now. Michelle, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome. All right.
Okay.
First word, taste.
Smell.
Music.
Loud.
Attitude.
Happy.
Perfume.
Strong.
Vibration.
Relaxation.
Interesting. Decision.
Making.
Noise.
Quiet.
Harmony.
Brand.
Spicy.
Hot.
And the final one is, drumroll, sparkles.
Shine.
Love it.
I think that last one is because of my daughter. She says, sparkle and shine, which I think might actually be some sort of cartoon characters.
It is definitely a TV show.
Okay.
My babysitting days have just it unlocked a memory to me. I was like, sparkle and shine. I've heard this before. Oh, well, that was so much fun. And, like I said, Michelle and I love talking about this. We think it's a very important topic. So if you are interested in hearing more, or you have questions for us, please feel free to reach out. Please rate, review, and follow us on Apple, Spotify, or any other places that you listen to your podcasts. And I'll just go through the gamut of other places to find us. You can follow us on HCD. You can follow HCD on LinkedIn and Twitter with @HCD Research Inc. and @HCD Neuroscience. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And again, rate, review, subscribe to wherever you listen to this podcast. So I just want to thank Michelle for chatting with me all the time. It's fun having
thank you. I love it. As always, our main message is, prove it. Use the right tool for the right question, get results that you can prove that you're measuring what you think you're measuring. And that's what this conversation was all about.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Until next time, take care.
Thanks. Bye.
HCD Mindset is produced by Helen Ross. For more information or updates, follow HCD Research on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter @HCD Research Inc. and @HCD Neuroscience. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and be sure to rate, review, and follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you, and stay tuned for more curious conversations.